part. I'll do it quickly. All right. Again, my name is Don Higgins. Most of you know me, but this is the 34th year I think I've been doing this. I started in 1988 or 89, just to let you know. I know that crew chief software is a very powerful tool, but it is just a tool. You still have to learn a lot about your car and what it does in certain situations, that the track conditions, etc. But I just hope that you guys can learn something. The goals today are going to be to demonstrate the newest features in Crew Chief, including our new Delta adjusted formula. We're going to try to help you determine what weather variables cause the most ET change for each type of fuel that people use. We're going to experiment with prediction factors and formulas for the best predictions. And we're going to explain the factors for alcohol, E85, regular gas, race gas, Q16, and junior dragsters. I'm going to show you how to personalize Crew Chief software with pictures and your own type of screens. And lastly, we're going to show you how to back up your files properly. Too many people have gone through Crew Chief for many decades now and don't back up their files. And your computers will go down, and they'll go down in the worst possible time. I can get you back up and running quickly if you back up your file. So we're going to start with databases. I'm going to circle what I was talking about. The menus are at the top of the screen, all the way up to the top here. But database menu is the most important thing I want to cover, and that's with that arrow. I have great drawing skills, as you can see. I mean, look at that. That's amazing. So we're going to start with databases where the arrows are pointing. Excuse me while I clear this. So we go and click on databases. Now, I use databases based on year of what year it is, and either track, if there's some oddball track conditions. Some tracks are downhill, some are uphill. As an example, you should always have a Bristol database if you race at Bristol, because it's an uphill track. NHRA allows 1%, and that track, I believe, is a full 1%, which that's 13 feet higher at the finish line than the starting line. That track requires a database of its own. There's other tracks like Division 5. You have Tri-State has a kind of a downhill track. So I make a separate Tri-State Earlville, Iowa track like this one. But if I go to an event at Indianapolis and then Joliet, Illinois, and the performance is similar, I don't make a new database. However, if I try a different #1 throttle stop, or if I try a different launch RPM when I'm ET racing, or if I go to a track where the ETs don't make sense, I make a database. So for example, when I change the shift points, like at the top here, it says 8th mile Gainesville 1.8 shift. That's because I made a change, and I'm going to draw a really handy dandy arrow there. Because I changed the shift point. Sometimes I'll shift down here at 1.9 seconds, sometimes at 2.1 seconds, like what's right below that. So each of those changes the performance, so that means I should have a database for that. You definitely want databases for quarter mile that are separate from 8th mile. You'll want 8th mile databases, and if you ever go 1,000-foot racing, you'll want a 1,000-foot database, which is the handy dandy arrow or circle I'm drawing down here is the length of the racetrack. So if you run 1,000-foot, you have to make a separate 1,000-foot database. If you go an 8th mile, separate. If in the middle of a race they change from quarter mile to 8th mile, make a separate database for that. Very important. And at least enter one run, a duplicate run, but in an 8th mile database. So we're going over 8th mile bracket racing and quarter mile bracket racing, etc. So I have this one that's highlighted right now, 8th mile Gainesville which was I was just at last month, 1.8 shift. Now I go through all of these right here, all the weights, rear gear ratio, launch RPM, tire pressures, front tire pressure, delay box I normally run, which is actually I wanted to change that 1.178 because that tracks pretty quick. Tree type is 000 unless you're at an ancient track. I still have people try to put a 400 or 500 in there. Don't do that. If they give you a 002 light, it's 000 for a tree type. And then your default dial in down here, just close. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then don't forget about setup info page 2. I'm going to circle that because I'm such an artistic person. Don't forget to go into this tab when you're done with the first one. So let's go over the correct way to make a database. I'll start you first. When I want to make a new database, the first thing I do is I highlight a good working database. So let's say I want to make a database off of this right here. So the first thing I'm going to do, let me erase all these drawings so they don't confuse us, is if I want to make a new database, the first thing I do is find one somewhat similar in the list. I'm going to put an arrow down here. I'm going to point to a database that's in there already. You click on that first. Very important. Click on that first, press the Enter key, and when you press the Enter key, it'll go up to this name assigned to database and turn it bright red up here. I'm sure you can see this. I'll draw an arrow on it though, just in case you can't. But the name assigned to database is highlighted in bright red. Only then do I click Start New Database, which I'm going to put a giant arrow on. Then I'll click this. Okay? Again, 3 steps. First step, highlight a good working existing database that's the same length. Usually it's simpler. Press the Enter key. When you're sure it's right, then you'll click the Start New Database. That's the 3rd step. And I'm going to put a little 3RD there. That's the 3rd step. And then this is really important next. As soon as I click Start New Database, watch what happens. See the name, the database name is now 2 stars. That's important because that means you haven't created a name. So I'm going to call this 2025 8th mile 1.8 shift. Okay. I press the Enter key and immediately save the database. And you're like, well, why do I immediately need to save it? Now I'm going to put 2 circles around save down here because we want you to save it immediately. And you're like, well, why do you need to save it immediately? Well, because I want to make sure you didn't overwrite an existing name. If you did, your existing database would just change names. But it didn't. So now a new database is in the list. I'm going to erase all the stuff here and do again. Pen. Now I've added one. It appears at the top. It should always appear at the top to let you know it's the first, it's the newest one. But also the old one is still down there. See that? I have a lot of people that don't do those steps properly, and they just simply overwrite an existing database that's perfectly good, and now they can't remember what name it was or whatever. So again, highlight a good working one, press the Enter key, then click Start New Database, type in a new name, and immediately save it, and verify that both are still there. Now, if you simply want to rename a database, you can do that. That's not a problem, but this is adding a new one. So I'm going to erase the drawings, and now I'm going to highlight the 2025, and now I'm going to go 4800 launch. The rear tire pressures are going to be 5.30. Still the same rollout. Front tire pressure is going to be 42. My delay box is going to be 1178. Oops, 1.178. Should fix that. Tree types 000, and my normal dial is going to be 453, and I'm going to save it. I'm not done though. I want to verify. I go back up to setup info page 2 and click on that. And here I want to make sure that everything's set up properly. And make sure if you're ET racing and you're not using a throttle stop to run a certain index, that it should be checked no throttle stop. And these fields should have zeros in them. Pick your fuel type here. Very important. And then also here is fuel system specifics. Obviously, it's not a junior dragster. I'll fix that in a minute. I have an 1/8 mile dragster wind factor. That's up there in the upper right. And then this stuff down here will always automatically be calculated for you. That's a horsepower calculation index, and they're different for each one. So I'm going to drop this down, and I'm going to go pick carbureted. And I'm going to save it. Always remember to save it. I'm going to erase these drawings, pen. Remember to save it after you make any changes. I click save, and that's ready to go. Now, if there's a database in here you want to change, just highlight it, press enter, and change whatever it is. But I just wanted to show you the right way to make a database. We purposely make it a little bit challenging because I want people to think about it. There's nothing wrong with adding a lot of databases, but don't do them all at once. I do databases when they're necessary, and that's it. I don't make 5 of them at the beginning of the year because I'll make changes to the car if I'm not happy with it, and it will need to coincide with what I'm doing. And so if I change factors and I start tinkering with stuff, I want to make a new database. I want to make sure that each database has a reason. Some of you guys have 300 databases. I don't suggest doing that. Now, if you had it 20 years, then maybe you'll have 300 databases, but and I don't even know how many I have. Some of these are for other people's cars, but you can see they go from 2010, 11, there's all different kinds in here. But if you race at one track, you still should have at least 2 databases for that one track. There's a lot of times I'll have a separate database for the same track for spring and fall, because the performance is much better, and one for the heat of the summer. I have, really hot, I think I have a couple of these that are hot weather. Yeah, right up here, there's Super Comp hot weather setup, for example, where the factors will be way different than normal. Once I'm happy with that, the last thing that is new in the program, has been for a while, but you can change pictures for each database. And that's kind of important. Let me show you how that works. Again, that's part of the personalization. It doesn't win you any races. But if you have multiple cars, I suggest highly that you have a separate picture for each database. To do that, you click on Change Pictures, and this little checkbox is right here. And that's where you'll change pictures. So let's say I do that, and I say, okay, I want to change a picture. A blank thing will come up, a blank picture frame holder, and you double click right in there. And then it will ask you to pick. I double click, it says, okay, where do you want to find it? And I don't know what this thing's doing, but it's going slow all of a sudden, but graphics. And it's going to ask you to choose from a picture. Now, for some reason, my system has just slowed down dramatically. I'm not sure why. I'll just pick one. And then that will be my database for 2025, me holding a big Wally. And then I'll save it. exit databases. Let me erase all the drawings here. So I just wanted to cover that. It's an important area I want people to know how to do. Does anybody have any questions on the database setup screen before we continue? Okay, so we'll move on then, unless somebody has something. I'll look for questions from here and there, every now and then. Okay, we covered that. The run entry form. Hold on a second. There's some questions coming up. Let me answer. The factors in the third page, Eric wants to know about. Those are default factors that control. That's a really good question. Let me go back and do that again, and I'll show you. Change pictures and factors. He was talking about these on the bottom left. And this is our corrected to standard conditions control factors. So you can use what I have here. They usually work fairly well, but these are when we want to correct a run back to perfect air. The new version of Crew Chief has some changes in that. I'm talking about the 2025 version, but that controls, hold on, let me exit out of here and what a lot of people don't realize that we have in Crew Chief is ET corrected to standard conditions. And that is in the middle here. I'm going to draw around. Let me see. Hopefully you guys can see. I'm going to draw an arrow down to it here. But in absolutely perfect weather, it says I'm going to run a 4.5073. Hopefully you guys can see this, but I'll draw another arrow up to that field. Those factors control that. And I would agree, in absolutely perfect air, I probably would run a 450 with a 7. Because I know I ran about 450 with a 7 in one of these runs I'll show you in a second. So that just helps me correct to standard conditions. That's what those factors control. You can use mine. They're actually very accurate. The default ones are pretty good too, but I've tinkered with mine a little bit to make it perfect. So that's what that means. Hopefully that answered it. And they do not change the prediction, Eric wants to know. They do not. They're not used. I do have a prediction formula for that. However, it is not displayed. It is still in testing mode because I really like it as a predictor until a certain weather change happens, and then it's not working like I want it to. So there's a lot of formulas that are in Crew Chief that you can't see that I tinker with. They're only available to me for right now until I prove out the logic and math behind it. So, and I'll show you some of those that are hidden and how you can look at them, but I'll cover that in just a second. All right, we'll erase those drawings. On the run entry form, personalizing a few things on it, I want to go over this. I'm going to draw a line or a circle around these areas here. Oops, right there and there. Okay, so these are split intervals right here. The 60 to 330 and the 330 to 8th are listed. How do you see those in your program? You double click the 60 foot. That field that says 60 foot that I'm going to put an arrow next to right there. Not the actual 60 foot, but the word 60 foot. Let me show you how that works. If you do that in your own program, see how I double clicked on 60 foot and all that disappeared. I double click again and they reappear. So that's something, I know my split intervals. So I want to see them as I'm typing the run in. And that way, as I type it in, I'll say, okay, I'm expecting a 187 something, and I'm expecting a 160 with a something. And as I type the run in, it just pops up and gives me that math, and I'm happy with it or dissatisfied with it real quick. And then the bottom two that I didn't draw very well, these are how far off the dial I was and my total package. Now this is a on the brakes run. I ran a guy, I think this was like the 20th pass that weekend I made, and he had a 3 thou total package against me. And I went dead on two with a 15 light on the brakes because I knew I was holding a little. Car felt a lot faster. And, he beat me. It's just the way it is. But up until that point, I had made a lot of passes. So uh, it happens. It is what it is. We learn from it, go on. But that's what those are for. So, for example, I'm going to switch back runs. Let me show you another thing before I go on. You can immediately switch runs down here on the bottom right, and on the upper left, there's arrows. I'm going to draw arrows to it because a lot of people don't realize this is here. But this is how I switch between runs very rapidly without having to use a search menu or anything. So I'm going to switch back a run. And this was a really good run. This was a 005 light. I was going 1 thou under. Won the round. Great race. Really felt good. But I wanted to show you that these little fields that you'll see, this is what they mean. Here I was 1 thou under the dial, and my total package was 4 thousandths of a second, which I can win a lot of rounds with that. So let me just go back. That is one of those areas. The other area you can, on the upper right, if somebody wants certain fields that other people don't, the actual word ignition timing or whatever's in this field becomes, if I double click it, I can turn on fields in the upper right and turn them off. If you keep double clicking, you'll see a whole bunch of this stuff show up. So as people ask for certain fields on the run entry form, that's where they go. I can personalize it for you or whoever else wants it. It's always available to you. A lot of people don't know that. So I just want to make sure people understand that there's a lot of customization that is available to you. If it makes sense to me and you, then I can put it in the program. Other things on the run entry form that I think are important is this traction meter on the upper right area. That's a 0 to 100 unless you have an actual traction meter. I think that's 85 out of 100 at that race. And that'd be probably pretty close. That's a pretty good track. Anything in the 70s, I don't predict with or less. That just means the track's not very good at all. The best track I've ever been to was Orlando when they had pro mods there. I couldn't even walk on the track. That was 100. But for the most part, that's what that's for. Okay, let me continue. Weather variables are in the middle of the screen, of course. But anything you don't know, if you're manually entering, a lot of people don't realize this. If you don't know a density altitude or adjusted altitude or grains of water, if you don't have a weather station that brings that over automatically, you can type a 0 and press enter in those fields. Let me tell you where I'm at here in a second. So I'm in the middle of the screen here. I just typed a 0 in the adjusted altitude field, and it says 0 right now. But watch what happens when I press enter. It automatically recalculates what it should be. That's important. Other things that are really important is the fact you don't need decimal points when you're entering ETs or mile per hour. I want everybody to understand this because this is a really cool feature. I've had it for years, many years now, but it's been improved recently. Like if I'm 005, I don't type 0.005 in this field. I just type 5 and press enter. Let crew chief do all the hard work. 1039, I don't need a decimal, 1039. It puts the decimal right where it belongs. 2921 for 330. See, it says 29 seconds right now. Let me highlight that. I'm going to bring your attention down here. It says 29.21 right now, but I haven't pressed enter. Crew chief software knows that you're not going to have a 29-second 330 time, or you shouldn't. So as soon as I press enter, it says, I don't think so, and fixes it. It doesn't tell you it fixed it, it fixes it. So you don't need decimals. Mile per hour is the same way. I just type numbers, 15253. It just fills the decimal in right where it belongs. It works that same way on this screen in all the weather variables as well, and the opponent information tab, which you should be putting all opponents in. You'll run these same people again. It's good to know what they've done. So I click on opponent information. I don't need to type 0.013. He was 13. So I type a 13. We do all the work for you. And putting opponents in will tell you how close the race was at every interval. Let me draw a line around that. And how far you won or lost by. And if you win, you get a minion going this, making fun of the racer. And if you lose, you get a minion going, what? So keep track of their number. I couldn't really put their numbers in for this race because everybody had their own temporary numbers, but I don't remember who this was I ran. Oh, it says Galletti. One of the older Galletti. Mr. Galletti, yeah, that's what it was. Okay. And then run completion is the next screen over. It'll tell you what you would have run had you not had to lift. Make sure you guys are using that. Very important. I'll draw a line around it. You'll see Crew Chief software works in order. Everything works in order. That's why it's arranged the way it is. Run entry form, save it, make sure you save it. Make sure you add notes too. A lot of people don't realize this. If I want more comments or notes down the bottom, I can just double click this area and a big note box will come up, allowing me unlimited comments. So you just type as much as you want, make sure you save it at the bottom, and it becomes part of that you can see. All right. Now, text colors are something that people have asked me about. If you double click on weather and track info, this actual, let me draw a line to it here, just a minute. I don't know if this is the best color for pens. Let me change the color just a second. Choose pen color. Let's try yellow. Yellow is worthless. Maybe pink. I'll try something else here. But if you double click where I just circled here, right there, I'll put a line to it up there. The actual word weather and track info, you're allowed to pick different text colors that might be easier to view. So it'll ask you, do you want to change text colors? And if you say yes, and let's say I just pick orange, then all these fields in the middle will be orange. Now, if you change pictures and you can't read this stuff, double click there and say yes and pick whatever it is you want. Let's try yellow. Whatever allows you to see it better, that's all. Version number in the upper right, make sure you keep it up to date. Okay, other things, quick search capabilities are in Crew Chief software, even on the run entry form. So let's say I want to see all the runs that I've made under this database. I can use the search menu at the top here, right there, or I can just right click on database. Or I can right click on track, the word track, or the word database, and it will allow me to do an instant search. So I like this. I just right click and here's all the runs I made under that database. Boom, just like that. I'm going to go in more, and if I right click on track, here's all the runs I made at Gainesville. Just like that. Pretty cool feature. Right click on any of those two words there, database or track, does an instant search. Kind of a neat idea that many people don't understand or realize it's in there. Of course, we can always use the search menu up the top to search all runs. That's how I pull up runs. If I go to a track I haven't been to in a while, I'll always go to search, and I'll go search by track, pull up Gainesville Raceway. Here's all the runs. I just pick whatever it is I want to run. I want to choose out of that list. Get used to that search menu. It has a lot of cool features. The search menu also has your average reaction time in both lanes. Anytime you pull up search, look on the bottom of the search screen. I'm going to do a handy dandy arrow here. Here's my average reaction time for all those thousands of runs in both lanes. And a lot of people don't realize they have a lane preference. So there's also options down here on the search screen that you can change how these work. Those of you that are ET only racers, I want you to, let me erase the drawings. I know this is probably not all that exciting yet for you guys, but I want to cover what you can do with Crew Chief first. So the word options, whenever you're in the search area, those of you that have the newest version of Crew Chief, you click on options, and there is two boxes here. ET Restore, and if you're throttle stop racing, also use throttle stop restore. ET, if you're only doing ET and that's it, click ET Restore, or you can add fields to the search screen or move fields around in here. If you're going to do that and you have questions, then perhaps it's best to call me direct before you do something like this. But I just want to let you know there's a lot of customization available for it. Just going to return, cancel. Okay. Transtemp field, oh, that's not really all that important. Oh, I forget to cover this. These things here, staging and how bright it was. These are fairly new. The right one is the bright, how bright it is. Make sure you do that to keep track of, because there are some important places there. I think I've covered everything on the run entry form. Let's go over questions here. It says, what does ET Restore do? If I hit ET Restore, I'll show you exactly what happens here. Let me give you a real world example. I'm going to erase all the drawings. I'm going to go to the search menu, or I'm going to actually, normal drawing. I'm going to right click on database. It's going to pop up all these runs. Now, if you'll notice, I run multiple classes, so I also run throttle stop classes. So I have quarter mile stuff in here, and I have throttle stop in here. If I go to the options button down here again, I'll show you what happens. If I want to erase all drawings, I'll go to normal options. I'll click ET Restore, and you'll notice what has just happened. Pen, let me get that. I can't get this out of the way just a second. I no longer have any throttle stop information in here because I clicked ET Restore, which doesn't use throttle stops. So I eliminated all the throttle stop information from the search screen. Just less fields for you to deal with. That's all. I'm going to bring mine back though, because I also do throttle stop racing and options, throttle stop restore, and that's all. It just brings back the fields that I really do need. Now I got a question on how to export. I will cover that. There's a really cool feature in Crew Chief software that allows you to export information to an Excel file, and this was asked by a customer who's a very good stock and super stock racer. If you want to export like your entire logbook, for example, if I go to event logbook and I want to export that, I will cover your question real quick. We'll go up to the setup menu if you want to turn that on. And again, this only works on newer versions of Crew Chief. I'll go to setup and go to program setup, second option down. And I'll bring your attention to this field down here. It's a checkbox that says Save to Spreadsheet. If you click this, save it. Every time you save a run in Crew Chief or go to your logbook, we create an Excel spreadsheet file. And that spreadsheet file you can import as it is. It will export to the Crew Chief 7 folder a file called logbook or something like that. You'll see it'll be under the C Crew Chief 7 folder. And if you open that, copy the fields, it'll look just like a spreadsheet, and paste it into a spreadsheet. It will format and have all the most pertinent information for you. Or you can go to the file menu and export file here as well, but that'll export a lot more stuff. You probably don't want that. But that's how you do an export. Okay, let's continuing on. Another very important area, we've gone over the opponent screen, is Time Slip Simulator. This is an option in Crew Chief. It's a company out of Australia that we interface with. If you buy that option, you can just call us if you want to order it. I want to show it to you real quick. It's an actual video game. And it allows you to simulate the run, either before you run somebody or after you run somebody. It will fill in all their ETs for it automatically from Crew Chief. You can look at different views. I can go overhead view, TV mode view, but I'll do this, let's see, point of view 2, sideways, watch opponent the whole way, and I'll hit play. And this is me against my opponent, and he, right here, it gives you the difference, the margin of victory, etc. Pause it, finish. Let me do that again. I'll play it. So this is how the race looked afterwards. I can also play this in Crew Chief. If you know who you're going to run and you've run them before, it will show you what the race should look like before you ever run them, which is really cool. So I'll show you this again up top. It gives you see how many feet apart we are. It's also calculated. It's kind of cool. And it gives you the race results, you know, how many feet I dropped, and let him have that. Just worked out in my favor, kind of a good race. But I can watch it from my point of view or their point of view. It's like $79 a year or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what I don't right offhand, but it's somewhere in that vicinity. It's a really cool thing. I can act like I'm in their lane, or I can act like right lane. I can go look at it from his point of view or my point of view. It's kind of a cool feature. Again, it's a yearly thing, but I highly recommend it, especially for junior dragster racers. It really helps them afterwards, and I use it all the time in my racing as well. Run completion is our next field. It'll tell you what you would have run up here had you not lifted. You can accept the ET if it looks right to you. You can also choose a different base run to base it off of, because sometimes I get put in some events I've been to, the left lane and right lane were different. So I don't want to complete off of the left lane when I'm in the right lane. So I can choose a different run to do a run completion on. You have different formulas down here in that bottom right. Most of the time I tell people to use the 8th mile racing off a 330 momentum, but you can go off 330 and compare the results, the ET in mile per hour. So if I lift or hit the brakes, I have to put the run in exactly as the time slip says, save it, put my opponent in, and then I go to run completion to see what it would have run, and I click accept new ET. And what does that do is it goes back into the run entry form and fixes the ET and leaves a note. So my actual ET was down here. I'm going to circle in bottom middle was 454.3 at 144.63. Had I not lifted, I would have run 452.9, and it fixes it for me. It actually goes in and fills this ET and mile per hour in. I dialed a 453. I was going 452.9. So I was going to be tough to beat with a 005 light anyway. So it was a great race, a lot of fun. Just worked out in my favor. Of course, you can win or lose those pretty easily, but that's what that's for. Very important to use run completion, because run completion does one other thing that's important. And the next thing we're going to cover is our logbook, because I want everybody to understand how powerful this event logbook button is down here in the bottom middle. You can also use the event log view up at the top in the menu area. I'll put an arrow to that. That's another place you can use that with a few more options. If I click on event logbook down there, or Control L, we'll do it with quick key. The event logbook will put all the runs side by side for whatever days that you selected. It'll only hold 27. Those of you that run 30 laps in a 5-day period, unfortunately, we run out of space. That's just part of the limitations we have because of screen space. But like, for example, this is the last 2 days of the event. Now, I was very fortunate. I did real well. It was a 60,000 to win event, and I went a lot of rounds that day, finally losing to a 3,000 package, but I did really well. I mean, my first run out was 006. And then I had a migraine. I won first round because it was a double red light. But at night, that round, I got fortunate they went red. But I had a migraine and I was miserable all night. But the next day, I was back to normal. And what I want to show you on this logbook is in between each column is these little numbers, and that's the difference between one to the other. A lot of you know this already, but I want to explain a few things about it. These little numbers will tell you everything you need to know. If you see one that's blank, like here I was 000. The round before was 001. But blank means you were 000. Otherwise, it'd fill out. Up above is these See It buttons. I want to bring your attention to the fact that these are in red, because red means I was on the brakes. Every one of these last rounds, I either had the person covered and it could conveniently put on the brakes, but crew chief completed the run for me, and so it turns See It red to let me know that these were run completion runs. So use these little differentials in between the columns. Very important actually. So, and then on the upper left is some boxes, stats. I'm going to point this upper left. Let me erase these other drawings so it won't be so cumbersome. Stats in the upper left here is the statistics for both lanes. So I'm going to click on that, and an orange box pops up that you can drag out of the way if you want. But it gives me my average reaction in both lanes. So average delay box, my average reaction time in the left lane was 008, and the right lane was 19. So even though I like the right lane better, historically I'm better in the left lane. My average 60 foot in the left lane was 103.1. My average 60 foot in the right lane was 103.2. My average ET was 452.1 in the left lane and 452.1 in the right. Even has the average weather station or weather information like DA and adjusted altitude, correction factors, all that. But also has something really important. Down the bottom, it says normal or trimmed. Trimmed means I want to take the high and the low out of the average, because we all have them. I always have at least one bad run or one amazingly good run that makes no sense. So I want to take that out to give me a better average. So I click trimmed, and my 008 light in the left turns to 007 now, and my average ET changed just barely, but my right now is a 15 light on average, but I'm 007 in the left and 15 on the right with the same amount of runs in both. It tells you how many runs up here on above each lane. Let me erase the drawings. But use this feature when you get a lot of runs, because you may not realize you are just a lot better in a lane you don't even like. Historically, I always navigate to the right lane. But in bracket racing lately, in the last 200 rounds, I am a 10th or a 100th better average reaction time in the left lane than I am in the right. I do not know why. Well, at least I can't put my finger on it. But I'm 007 average in the left here and 15 in the right. Again, that goes according to plan. It goes according to what I've found in historical data as well. So why do I stay away from the left lane? I don't know. But when I'm in the left lane, I'm a badass. I just know that because I can win a lot of rounds with the 007 light and going 452. So use that feature, teach yourself something. You'll be amazed what you can find out sometimes. At least I was. That's the reason I brought this screen in and created. You can print this if you have a printer. You click the printer guy in the upper left, and it will print a version of this as well. It just tried to print it, but let me try again here in a second. See if it'll do it. Well, it's trying to print regardless of what I do here. Hold on a second. Let me ask you. Yes. Can you cover switching a run in run completion? I have trouble when I choose a different run. Okay, Jeff Cheney, I'll do that just a second. I should have covered that before. You're right. I didn't. So are there any other questions on the log view screen? And also on the bottom is all your split intervals and the differences down here. We like to see 00 differences, but sometimes they don't. You know, when the car's right, I should be 00 differences between one round to the next. Hopefully. But all your ETs are here. All the weather data is here, all down in here. A lot of great information here. If somebody's having trouble with the predictions, this is the first screen I go to. And usually I can tell they're not staging properly because there'll be a big difference in their reaction time and their 60 foot. So you see here in the middle of the screen, I was 001 and 000 with the same delay, or I had 1 thou to the delay and I was 1 thou. Glad I did. But I was 1035, 1035, 292.3, 291.6. But I fixed a problem on that run. I won't bore you with all those details, but this is a very important screen to master. You will learn a lot about your car. To get out of the screen, just hit the escape key on your keyboard, or you can click the little arrow in the upper left to get you out. Escape key is a lot faster. Okay, I forgot to cover under run completion how to choose a different run. So I'm going to go back to run completion. I want to cover this. What the question is how you choose a different run to do that. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click that. A box will come up. Let's say I want to choose this run. If the ET doesn't change much, there might not be a reason for it to change. Let's see if I go to momentum. It does change when I use the momentum. It says 452.9 versus the 330. If I choose different runs, I should get slightly different run completions, as long as it makes sense. Now, so I'm clicking between them and there are some changes, but that's how you do it. You pick things, different runs that way. Go back to run entry. Hopefully that erases that or answers that question. Okay, so let's go to the predict screen where everybody really is curious about anyway. Let me uncheck text messaging. I'm going to go over things in Crew Chief that are new and cool. Went over the logbook. Words I'll cover in a minute. What are the tabs under Crew Chief's prediction screen that people are scared of or don't understand? So let me cover some important stuff here. First off, the word base run. I'm going to put an arrow to. This is a new feature in Crew Chief called Snapshot. And I'm going to cover that in detail, but I want to show you where it is. If I hover over the word base run, where that arrow is right now, if you do that in your own Crew Chief and you have a newer version, it changes to snapshot. What is snapshot? Snapshot is I want a snapshot of the weather and act like the run hasn't been made. Very important. I want to act like the run has not been made, and I want to see what predictions it would have come up with the actual 60 foot filled in for me. So I'm going to click snapshot. And what it does is it moves. Let me erase these drawings and go over this again. When I click base run, it changes to snapshot. It takes all of the weather from the base run and moves it to current. It also turns the weather off in the bottom middle. See this? I'm going to draw another arrow down to it as well. But it turns the weather off because you just told us you want a snapshot to help your predictions. So we don't want current weather coming in while we do this, because otherwise it would defeat the purpose. So it'll turn off the weather, move all the weather from the base to the current. And you say, well, okay, what do you do with that? Well, it allows me to go down here and switch to different runs to see what the actual prediction is. You can switch runs on Crew Chief. You can go forwards or backwards. Most people obviously go backwards, but so this prediction, I'm going to go on the bottom left, and this is really important. I'm going to switch a run, and I'm going to go back because this particular run was way, way fast, but I'm going to go to one with a more normal 60 foot. So I'm going to switch back a couple of runs to where my 60 foot was pretty normal. I was 103.5 the previous run, and then this one I was 103.9 because it pulls the actual 60 foot, all the weather, and my prediction is 452.9, which is exactly what I ran on this one. These are showing a little bit faster than I actually ran. They're close, but they're not perfect. So what does this mean? Well, this is a snapshot of all the weather and the 60 foot all filled in for me under current. I'm going to draw that arrow again. Current is filled in with the actual weather at that instant. Snapshot is a snapshot of the weather and your car at the 60 foot mark, because we have your 60 foot filled in, we have all of the weather filled in, and here we're making the actual predictions. My car went 452.9. Crew Chief number 1 is perfect. These two are 7 thou and 5 thou off. Not terrible. So what do I do with this? Well, the first thing I normally do with any of these formulas is I will start here on the bottom right, choose formula. I'm going to draw an arrow on the bottom right and pick a different formula. I just drop that list down. Let me erase all the drawings and do that again. So I'm going to go first here, this drop down, then I'm going to put a big arrow to, man, I don't have very good arrow making capabilities, but you get the idea. DA and half barrel, half humidity is a good way to start. But I'm going to drop the list down, and it only affects the bottom two. I'm going to pick horsepower correction. Now it's a little slow. Now I'm going to pick DA, barrel, and humidity. It's a little bit fast. Density altitude by itself, damn near perfect. So I went 452.9. It's telling me 452.8, 453.0, 452.9. And by the way, a lot of people don't realize that the average prediction is also shown all the time. That's right here. Average prediction is 452.9, which is exactly what I ran. So what does this mean? Well, it means that whatever happened on that run was affected by density altitude more than other factors. So let's start and see why. Erase these drawings and start here. When you look at your prediction screen, the current and the difference and then the ET change column. I want you to, anytime you change a formula, it changes the ET change column based on those formulas. So these things, the current, the difference. You'll notice difference is color coordinated. Red is slower, green is faster. So at 6.8 degrees worse, 2.1% humidity is all it is. Barometer was better by 10, which usually affects my car a little. DA was worse by 373 feet. Adjusted altitude was worse by 126. Correction factor was worse by 5 thousandths. There wasn't much wind difference, but the 60 foot was 4 thou. So look at that, and then I go to the ET change column, and now this new formula says the ET should have changed by 3 thou for density altitude. The base ET was 451.7 down here on the bottom left. Adding that 4 thou difference in 60 foot and the almost 4 thou in DA makes for a 452.8, which is, in this particular case, was dead nuts on. However, my car doesn't normally do that. I mean, it will follow somewhat, but usually DA and barometer are important to it, and humidity. Humidity didn't change much at all. I'll get rid of all these drawings so it makes more sense. However, barometer being better in green, as you'll notice here, will usually pick my car up a little, even 3 or 4 thou. So the fact that it didn't is all due to the fact that my 60 foot was slower by 4 thou than the base run, which is over here. But Snapshot allows me to try different formulas. If crew chief number 1 hadn't been just perfect, I would click on the upper right and try a different answer for it. So a lot of you guys don't realize that this crew chief number 1 is an entirely adjustable new formula. I click on it and it pops up a box that says, okay, how do you want this formula to work? Now it allows you to choose weather variables. 1/8 mile bracket racers on gas or alcohol, I highly recommend using this delta adjusted, which I'm going to circle with my amazing artistic capabilities. Delta adjusted altitude, grains of water, and barometer is what I use. It's up to you. Those are what I use in 1/8 mile bracket race. On the right is the factors that control the answers. So for barometer, I have 0.2 for 1/8 mile bracket racing. You're welcome to use what I have on 1100 horsepower. If you're on gas, use this. Grains of water, let me erase these because it's getting a little cluttered. Grains of water formula, I use 20. God, I missed that entirely. And the delta adjusted, I use 511. So that goes to that. Grains goes to this. And barometer goes straight across to that. You're welcome to use these same ones. And I guarantee you, if you're anywhere near what I run, that logic with those same factors, for me, is plus or minus whatever the 60 foot change is. There were several times that weekend where I not only hit the prediction to the 1,000th, but I did it over and over again. I think it was 3 runs where my prediction was plus or minus 1,000th of what it actually ran. So if you're on gas, use that. If you're on alcohol or E85, this will be higher in the delta adjusted, would be in the 700 range. But the rest continue to work with the same numbers, at least to start with. I think most of the guys I work with, this delta factor where I have all these arrows pointing right now, is the 7 to 900 range. 20 on grains, 20 on barometer, 0.2 on barometer, and test it. Using snapshot, I think you'll find eighth mile bracket racers that will put you as close as humanly possible. Try that formula out. And if not, if it needs less for gas, you can always try less. But that's a new formula. It's a new logic that I created and have been testing for 2 years before I ever put in crew chief that people could see. Okay, so another area on the prediction screen that allows you to see that is, I'm going to circle mine. You may not have this, but I'm going to put an arrow here. This is an adjustable field. What does that mean? That means if I double click the word delta adjusted where it is right now, your case might look something different. I can double click that and it goes to air density ratio. I double click again, goes to relative air density. Double click again, actual air density, and then delta adjusted. So you can cycle through those. I would highly recommend looking at that delta adjusted and just seeing how it works for you. I've tested it forwards and backwards on my car. I have a pretty good car. Usually the only thing that lets me down is the driver. But that formula works really well, and I'm curious to see how people respond to it. Another thing to look for in the crew chief prediction screen is anything in yellow. Yellow means, okay, we'll accept it, but you better agree with it. You see all this yellow here? That means the estimated 60 foot that either it was pulled in by crew chief or you typed over is different than the base. We turn it yellow, we'll allow it, but you better agree with it. And I see a lot of people call me up, I hear a lot of people call me up and say, prediction's wrong. I just made a 452 run. It says I'm going to go 453-1. The first place I go to on the prediction screen is what did you type in the estimated 60 foot area? And usually that's the difference. So you can drop this list down and go to density adjusted 60 or a whole bunch of different options. But if you override it, see, and I just chose density adjusted 60 foot there, and it told me I was going to be a 103.89, and I was actually only 1 thou off of what it said. So I use that a lot. Density adjusted. I also use humidity adjusted, or I'll go down to the bottom, DA, baro, and relative humidity adjusted 60 foot. If I can't make a decision, there's an average 60 foot down the bottom, or if my 60 foot doesn't change, I always leave it at same 60 as baseline. And then you have to live with whatever your choice is. Does anybody have any questions on snapshot so far? It is a highly complex thing, but if you use it enough times, it really is bam, 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 and you're done. And once I come up with an answer, I don't adjust it every single round because there will be some differences that happen that are not weather related, but track related or how you stage. And I cannot help you with that. If you stage carefully, then it'll be really, really accurate. Now, it's funny because I say stage carefully, and if you watch me stage, I have built up, after all these rounds, a very fast way I stage, and it works for me. But if you are a bumper in and you're really careful, as long as you do the same thing all the time, keep it up. As long as your 60s are holding, making sense, the 60 to your reaction time doesn't invert with your 60, then you're doing the same thing over and over again. people say I bomb the car into the stage beam. It's just because I have built up muscle memory in my brake foot that I drop in very rapidly, but I seem to drop in about the same place every time. And my 60 doesn't vary much, and my ETs don't vary based on that. So, however works for you, whatever it is, but just do the same thing over and over again. Which leads me to one thing I forgot to cover in the event logbook. Before I go on, I want to cover this. I was just talking about inverting reaction time and 60 foot. So let me cover what that means. In crew chief, we have our reaction time and 60 foot. I'm going to circle all of this and give you guys an example of what happens. If you stage the same way and you don't flat miss the tree or something, then your reaction time and your 60 foot should move together somewhat. So for example, here, my first run, I'm always a little slow. The second one, we only got one time run, went right into eliminations. So I normally have 1170 something in my delay box, but I've been kind of slow lately, so I dropped it down. And I've found out what the problem was, and it's back to 1170. But I picked up 22 in reaction time and slowed down 6 thou in 60 foot. Now the weather was worse by 692 feet, so I should have slowed down a little. But it shouldn't be a negative and a positive. Like here, I was, I had a migraine, there was nothing. But here I was 009 better reaction time and only 1 thou difference in 60 foot. Here I was 30 slower reaction time, but only 002 60 foot. And here, that was just a fluke run for me. I just missed the tree. Here I'm 34 quicker, 005 slower, acceptable. Double O's here. I'm 001 difference in reaction time and no difference in 60 foot. Here I'm 22 slower and 20 quicker. However, I did fix a problem between those two runs. So you can't really compare. All the way up here, I was running good until the car had a failure of a spark plug. I fixed it the next round. Everything was good, back to normal, as fast as shit again. And then my 60 foots went back to normal when the DA was back to normal. So that's why I want to show you the invert effect of if you go in deep one round, you'll have a quicker reaction time and a slower 60 foot. And that will affect your predictions. And then you'll call me and say the predictions are wrong, and I'll have to explain to you that you're not staging the same way every time. So I just wanted to cover that with you guys while it was on my mind. Sorry for bouncing around. Okay, does anybody have any questions on the prediction screen before I continue on? I know we've been going a long time now, and I appreciate everybody sticking with me. There's still quite a few of you here. I don't want to bore you to death, but if you have questions, please ask them. I will get to them as I see them. The next thing I want to cover that's very important on the prediction screen is this current column one more time. I'm going to draw a line to it. A lot of people don't realize you have search capabilities on the prediction screen. Anything in the current column, I can right click on and do an instant search for similar runs. For example, I'm going to left click on weather station DA. It's the fourth one down, temperature, humidity, barometer, then DA. I'm going to right click on that 1265. Here's all the runs I've made in the program that are plus or minus about 150 feet from 1265 DA. So when I do a prediction, I usually will right click there, or I'll right click on correction factor and see now it limited the correction factor to only one run it found that's not throttle stop. But if I want to combine search capabilities, I go down to this button. I'm going to draw a couple of arrows down to it called Search Weather. Even people that have had software for a long time don't realize this is here. But if I click Search Weather, it allows me to look at different weather variables combined. So I can say, okay, I want to see all the DAs that are similar. But I could have picked barometer and only found one run where the DA and the density, altitude, and the barometer were similar within the last year and a half. It automatically defaults to less than 2 years. And let me show you where that is. You can change that. You can even make it even farther limiting. But in the last, say, year and a half, only have one run that matches that DA and that barometer. Let me erase the drawings. And it will tell you in Crew Chief where that is. It will tell you right here how many runs under similar conditions. And then I can display that by clicking on Display Runs down the bottom. So let's do that. When I do a prediction, I use this. I say, okay, it's telling me 452.9. Well, here's a run I made at 452.9 with similar weather. So double check your predictions if you have enough runs in there. Double check predictions against historical data. I call it trust but verify. So I trust my predictions implicitly, unless I have a run in the last year and a half in the same database that tells me I'm wrong, but it won't be very far off. I mean, usually I do this and I'll have 4 runs out of 1,880 that are plus or minus 5,000, whatever the prediction is showing. And if I get that reassurance, historical reassurance, I feel a lot better about predictions. When you're done using Snapshot, turn the weather back on, the bottom middle. Don't forget to turn the weather back on. Now, every time you exit Crew Chief and restart it, it'll automatically have the weather on anyway. But just so you know, don't forget this step once you're finished, because otherwise the weather station will not come back in. Does anybody have any questions about the prediction screen before we move on? Another thing that I've added, here, let me erase the drawings, that you probably won't see on your own version unless you turn this on. The bottom middle here, there's some fields called run date, lane, run number, and time of day is right in the bottom middle. How do you turn that on? Well, you go to prediction factors right here and click on it. This is a valuable thing to have. In the bottom middle, you will see a checkbox. I will draw an arrow to it and circle it. Show base date and run number. If you check that, Crew Chief will show you the base run date and run number on the prediction screen. If it's not checked, you will not see this on the bottom middle that gives you what run is on the screen. So just so you know, make sure there's, again, you can create your own formulas. Just click on Crew Chief number 1. It's a really powerful tool. Let me just make sure. Oh, another question people have is there'll be different colors in some of these fields. If you ever see bright red or bright green in DA or adjusted altitude or humidity, or excuse me, barometer, it's because it'll turn really weird colors when there's a substantial difference in barometer and density altitude. If it's bad, it'll be bright red, telling you that you might slow down more than you think because you're out of your jetting area. And if it's bright green, it might mean that you're going to either have a lot more performance than you think, or you're not jetted enough, you may want to look at it because bright green means you may need more fuel. Super bright green, need more fuel usually. Super bright red, you're probably rich and it's not going to have the performance you think it has. So how does crew chief learn? That's another question I get a lot. And crew chief does learn, and it's important that everybody understands how it works to a limit. And that tab is calculate ratios and factors right here. That's a tab that if you click on, it wants you to tell it that it's time to reevaluate its prediction logic. I don't go into here very often because I've got a pretty good setup going. But if you're starting out with a new setup and the predictions aren't right, I always go to this. You'll notice on the left-hand side, there's a red 1, 2, and 3. And that's the order things work. Number 1 is the base run. The run that's on the run entry screen or on the predict screen is the run that you say is the most important run. Number 2 is every run in that database except for what's in run number 1, because you can't compare a run against itself. So when I want to compare a run, it has to make sense. The first thing I look for is the 60-foot area. I never select a run in the number 2 areas unless the 60 foot is plus or minus 5,000. Unless, of course, there's 4,000 feet difference in DA, but even at that, I would have a different database for it. But so how does it work? Well, let's try to teach crew chief something. I'm going to double click on this run that's in yellow in number 2. And when I do that, it'll say analyzed to the left-hand side. Let me erase the drawing so you can see it. You see it says analyzed. And when I do that, it means it's now analyzing the run, and it will tell me on the bottom of the screen the new DA ratio, the new AA ratio, new correction factor ratio. Now, I'll look at that, and then I'll say, okay, in between number 1 and number 2, I'm going to draw big arrow or big circles around these. Adjust for wind if it's real windy, but most of the time I'll just adjust for 60 foot to see if it stabilizes. So I'm going to go click this adjust for 60 foot in the middle of those 3 and see if it changes its mind. So I click it, and it dropped from 1,200 feet DA to 1,024, 400 feet of adjusted. Then I'll say, okay, adjust for wind. So it was a wind change, slight wind change, but now we're down to 853 feet, 340 feet of adjusted. And you say, okay, so now what? If I agree with that, down here in the bottom right is a button that says, okay, I agree, update the factors. And you'll see there's 2 different things that will show here on the bottom right. It says update small factors. If it's a major change, like over 1,000 feet of DA, that button will say update large factors. Well, what does that mean? I get a question a lot. What it means is there's 2 sets of factors. So if I click update small factors right now, it's going to go back into my prediction factors tab, which I'm going to draw a big arrow to. God, I hope I'm not boring the hell out of you guys. There's still a lot of people, 150 of you still here. So that's great because it's been over an hour and a half. So I'm going to click on prediction factors. And you'll see under prediction factors, we have 2 sets. We have the small weather change factors here, and orange is large change. And then a third tab is for delta adjusted. So currently, in this particular database, it takes 989 feet to change that car 100th of DA, 489 feet of adjusted, and that's great. Now, let me erase the drawings. That's the small weather changes. When large, it's substantially different, and you're free to use these same formula factors if your car is similar to mine. And I guarantee you that it will be very accurate. So there's two things that I want to add into Crew Chief, and that is these wildly different weather variables. My car doesn't seem to change much from like minus 200 feet of DA all the way to about 800 feet of DA. They're not much of a change, but over that, there is. So that's why there's a major difference between this factor that I have in and the small changes are much higher than that. So again, when you're looking at density altitudes that are either 0 or up to about 800 feet, most people's jetting won't allow the car to change much because many of us do not jet up when it's going to be 0 DA. You know, if you're 50 degrees, great barometer. If you don't add enough fuel, the car's not going to really run that much better. But if you've got enough fuel, it'll be very happy and very consistent for about 800 feet of DA, and then it'll start to change after a certain number. What number that is not something that Crew Chief calculates currently. I mean, it's in there, but I haven't been able to put my thumb on exactly how and when this is going to work. But it is coming. There will be factors for 0 to 1,000 feet of DA. I'm testing right now. So, you know, that's something to look for. But all of these factors are important if you're using a formula that uses, let me explain what I'm talking about. If you're using density altitude in this drop-down list, then that's great. It doesn't matter what the humidity or barometer factors are. It's not looking at. However, if I do pick DA half barrel, half humidity, it's going to start looking at barometer and humidity as a multiplier. So that's how that works. I don't want to get ahead of anybody. Does anybody have any questions right now on what I've covered? Because I know I go too fast for a lot of people. And I'm sorry that I've been doing this for 40 years, so everything kind of goes fast for me. But I'm hoping that you are learning something. If not, then I apologize. But usually people get a lot out of these. So if you have questions on the prediction screen or anything that you don't understand so far, let me know. But the way I want Crew Chief used is that you put a couple runs in. If the predictions are right, you don't touch anything. But if I put a run in and I'm 500 feet of DA and the next run I'm about 1,200 feet of DA, if the predictions aren't right there, then we can make small tweaks and get it right there very rapidly. And then I don't want you to touch it. If you feel the need at every race to touch it, that's usually the sign that you have something going on with the car, or you need a second database for whatever is going on with the weather. That's why I have a database for good weather and one for bad weather in a lot of classes I run. Because in the spring and in the fall, the car really is fast, very easy to dial. When it's 100 degrees outside, it becomes a track challenge and a jetting challenge. So that's why I have separate databases for that. I can tinker with one database's factors and not screw up another one. That's really important. Otherwise, you will chase your tail a lot. All right. If the predictions are not accurate, that's what we do. We test a couple of things. However, before you get crazy on it, I'd like you to go to the prediction factors and take a picture with your camera of the small weather changes, the large weather changes, and the delta before you start making major changes, just in case you're trying to chase a run that may not be a good run. And I see that a lot where people just have a really weird run come out of the blue, and then they try to force the factors to predict it and then screw up a perfectly good database. So take pictures before you do anything crazy. And to remember that right click on the current or check the search weather button to verify your predictions. Time slip simulator power savings. For those of you that have weather stations connected to Crew Chief, we sell a lot of these. Just make sure your computer power savings are turned off. If you don't understand, I can cover that, but make sure we're not having the screen go black while you're up in the lanes, because otherwise it will be a problem. Next question next thing I'd like to cover is the tracks thing. Real quick, I want to cover this because I just got a question about it. Tracks menu at the top of the screen. Draw an arrow to it. That's where you put all your tracks in. It's got an important feature in the tracks area. And that if you go to an event or a track that has 4-digit precision, like here, like my Central Illinois Dragway used to do this. I don't think they do that anymore. But if your track gives you a time slip that has 4-digit precision instead of 3, make sure you check that. And if it displays 594 foot clockings, check that. And then it will give you a field for 594. And it will automatically increase the amount of digits so you have full time slip continuity there. So that's a real simple thing. I just want to cover real quick, and I'll go answer the rest of these questions. Okay, Steve wants to know if you get your ratios all jacked up, is there a simple reset? And that's what I was just about to cover. You said you have a gray, and then John says he's got a gray bar popping up across the top right of my program. How do I get rid of it? The gray bar is usually what we call a wait window, and it might be saying that the weather is not coming over. If it's just nothing in it, then yeah, I'd like to know. But let me cover this real quick for Steve. If the predictions, you've been tinkering with them and you went backwards, you go to the prediction factors tab again. Let me go under predict ET is that prediction factors tab. Don't be afraid of this. Click on it, and then you'll see on the bottom right, reset factors. If your fuel type is correct here, I'll circle that because I'm so good at drawing, and everything's goofed up, then just simply come down here in the bottom right and click reset factors, and we're going to reset them back to where we want you to begin. You click that, then you come on over here. Save is always on the bottom left of everything, and remember to save the factors and test to see with snapshot if it's better. It usually will fix somebody being off in left field. If you're always going to have 1 or 2 runs out of 20 that don't make a lot of sense, don't chase those, because a lot of times I'll have one. I had spark plug issues at that last event. It would misfire, but it was so abrupt I couldn't tell what it was until it failed. It failed in the 8th round or 9th round, whatever it was, and the car misfired all from half track on, and I lost that round because of it. Well, I put new spark plugs in, and the car came right back to stupid fast again, and so I didn't want to chase that one run. So reset factors will get you back to where we want you to start. It doesn't mean it will be the end all. It just means that's where we want you to start. Okay, Eric wants me to go over the delta adjusted formula options. Should we mess with it or leave it alone for now? Okay, I will give you numbers for the delta adjusted depending on. So if we click back on predict and I click on crew chief number 1, if you're talking about factors tab, Hold on a second. Let me get back to that. This delta adjusted, um, I would leave it at the default number for most people. 1 delta RH density that's what I use. There's other ones I made for pro mod racers that are in there. The beginning values, all these I would leave what I have here. If they're not exactly what you have on yours, start with mine. And it tells you the multipliers. But start with my numbers. You're welcome to them. They work well. What I'm talking about is these numbers under delta adjusted tab, these guys right here. This is still in full development. I look at these a lot. I test my own car, which it worked really well at the last event, and I test others. And I test by E85, I test with Q16, with regular race gas, alcohol, nitrous oxide. I've tested a lot of different combinations. So I've got a pretty good setup for this. But start with mine. If they're in La La Land, all we have to do is usually make very small changes to them. So usually I just want people to click on this. The delta one, I would, right here, 1/8 mile bracket racing, again, that would be on gas. If you're on alcohol, that number should be 200 to 300, 400 higher, but the rest should be good. You're welcome to these. I think you'll find that they work pretty well. When it's hot out, though, this number will definitely be dropping. In good weather, that's what it is. If you have a hot weather database, I would probably cut that in half. When it's 100 degrees out, that probably needs to be half. But again, you can test your own with that snapshot. It's very fast to test. Change one of these factors and then retest. And it's instantaneous. If you don't understand, feel free to call me and I'll explain it to you. But it's a really cool feature. It makes the predictions very accurate, and it's pretty cool. Weather graphs, a lot of people don't realize all of this. You can view a report. Here's every minute of the day, every reading it took. Weather stats gives you the average or what it was at certain times of the day, and I compare multiple day events. I'll go back a day, and it prepares me for what to expect the rest of the day to be. I just don't like surprises. So there's a lot of cool stuff on the weather graphs page. Finish line manager is if you know you're going to run next, you can put their ETs in or pull up somebody with similar mile per hour and use them. If you get laddered towards the end of a race, that works really well. We've gone over that. We're about done here. Backing up data files. Let's go over that. There's 2 ways to back up files. You go to the file menu at the top left, back up data files. Make sure you have a flash drive in the computer before you do this. It takes anywhere from 15 to 45 seconds to do a backup. So I'll walk you. And it always kicks you out of the program when you're done. Let me find the flash drive to plug in. So if I do that, I'll plug in a flash drive before I continue on. And I'll click Backup Data Files. It'll list all the drives. I'll click US Drive D and click OK. And then it'll back up my files to that flash drive and kick me out. They've been known to generate some error messages from time to time too when the computer's trying to take weather readings and it's just told it. But as soon as it's done, it will kick me out of the program. That's a quick backup. A full backup would be to copy the entire contents under the C Crew Chief 7 folder, which you should do this about every 6 months, a full backup. Copy that to a flash drive and overwrite the existing ones, and you'll be a lot happier if something were to happen, and it always does happen. Believe me, every month there's 6 to 8 people that I cannot help because they have not backed up their data files in years, and now their computer won't start, and they have nothing to go off of. If you just spend 15 to a minute time, mine is a huge backup because, of course, I've got a lot of runs. But most of you will be backed up in 12 to 14 seconds. Mine has got 2,000 runs and 15 years of weather data in there, so it takes a little longer to back up. But please do that. It will save your ass, believe me. Does anybody else have any questions or anything they'd like me to cover? I appreciate a lot of people still sticking around. I know it's been a long night, but I hope you got your value out of this. When we leave this webinar, it's going to ask you a couple of questions. My wife put in there to see how I was doing. Hopefully I've provided you guys with a nice service. Again, we have weather stations in stock. A lot of people don't realize I wrote a crime thriller novel a few years ago. It's available on Amazon. It sounds weird. It's nothing to do with drag racing, even though it does have some drag racing. When I was younger, there was a kidnapping that we got involved in, and so that's what the story is about. But it's a really cool book. If you're interested, let me know. I have them in stock, but you can get them on Amazon or Walmart or Barnes and Noble. They have the same things too. But if you have any other questions, feel free to ask. I will hang around for a while longer. No question is stupid, believe me. So, okay, let's see here. All right, Jamie wants to know what's the difference in weather station DA and crew chief DA. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. Weather station DA is what the actual weather station shows for density altitude. And our DA is the calculations that I have a slightly different calculation of DA than a lot of the weather station companies do. But I've been working on density altitude calculations for 35 years. And I don't think that some of the DA calculations are as perfect as I wanted them to be. But there's not a big difference usually in them now, but I do tinker with a density altitude calculation from time to time that is different. Thanks, Jeff Cheney. Appreciate you coming. Eric, thanks again. And what should you use for quarter mile? Well, quarter mile, I would start the same as eighth mile. However, quarter mile usually is more sensitive to weather than eighth mile. So if what I gave you doesn't work, take a couple hundred off of that and try and see what happens. We will normally start you with a pretty good number on our default factors, but if they are not right, I tell people that are bracket racing quarter mile that take a couple hundred off of what for that delta adjusted from what I'm using. And so if are you on gas or alcohol, Jamie? C12 and X16. Yeah, then the C12 is probably a little more sensitive than the X, but I've tinkered with X16. I really like that fuel. And it's cheaper. At least it was cheaper the last time I bought it than by far. So on those try what I gave you, and if that doesn't work, the C12 is probably going to be a lot lower number. The X16 might be another 100 lower. Try that, small changes, leave the rest alone, and just test. Kevin wants to know, does each database save factors differently? Yes, it does. That's what allows me to have a hot weather database for when it's 100 degrees out, where I'll be half of what I do, at least half what I use for good weather. So each database has its own separate factors, and each car, if you run multiple cars, can have their own sets of factors as well. Start with what we have, but move differently. They'll have, each database can have its own wind factors. I never really had a chance to cover wind, but be careful with wind. We're going to look at what's the wind differences are and try to calculate what that means. Doesn't always mean that people have the wind sensors pointing the right direction. So be careful with wind on. But each database is its own program. So it's very important that each database be allowed to have different factors, because I have two specific databases that are the exact same car but different weather parameters, and they both work great. But I cannot predict a hot weather one to a cold one and vice versa, because there's just too much difference in jetting is what I found. If I go hot weather, I usually will pull a few jets. When it's really good weather, I add a couple of jets till the car slows down a little bit, at least 1 to 2 when it's really cold out. Give yourself enough fuel to not hurt the motor and let it respond to weather variables properly. Hopefully that answers your question. If you have a follow-up on that, Kevin, just let me know if that doesn't make sense, if I can explain a little bit better, or feel free to call me later time and I can go over it with you as well. I'm always available, unless I'm not. So if you have a question and you're at the racetrack, I prefer, if you have a problem or a real serious question, call right from the racetrack while it's fresh in your memory, and it will save us both a lot of hassle. So, yeah, different database for different jetting. If you're jetting because of weather, then yes, I would have a different database. I went up jet sizes, 6 jet sizes for this last race, and the car loved it. I've been having trouble all last year with predicting, and it was all based on the fact that people said I had too much exhaust smoke coming out, black smoke, so I jetted way down. The car was just horrible last year. And finally I said, I got to do something. So I stuck a lot of jet, way more. I went up 4 jet sides, and then I went up an additional 2, and it absolutely went back to being a fast car and very dialable. So if you have major differences in jetting, if you're just going up 1, I wouldn't think a new database would be required. But if there's 4 jet sizes between spring or fall and August 14th type races, then yeah, I would have a different database for that. And it's a good idea to name the databases based on what you're doing. If you're not changing components but just jetting, and you're trying something out, it's a good way to do it, to make a new database, stick those runs in there, and see if it's working better or worse. You can adjust the factors for hot weather, substantially different than cold weather, and it should work better for you. But if you have a problem while you're at the event or you still can't get it, just give me a call. Hopefully that answers that question. Thanks. You're welcome. I appreciate it. Yes, thank you. You're welcome. I'm glad I got a comment saying, yes, I'm glad I learned about the logbook screen. I had no idea it did all that. You're welcome. Thomas wants to know if crew chief changes the factors as it learns. That's what the calculate ratios screen is for. And if you use that, it will change the factors it wants to change for you without manually doing it. And I'll use that a lot of times when I make a major change if the predictions are wrong. I'll see what calculate ratios comes up with, and I'll test it with that snapshot feature I showed earlier on and see if it's more accurate. Again, I don't chase a bad run though. There are times when my car all of a sudden slows down 400ths and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And if I could make crew chief predict it right, but I had to chase the run. And so that tells me that, if it goes from, 250 feet of DA, changes the car 100th to 900 feet, something had to change in the car. And usually it's jetting or track or whatever it is. But that's usually the sign that I'm chasing a run that makes no sense at all, or I just had a really bad run, the first run, and the rest of the runs are good. So that's how crew chief learns, is to calculate ratios. When everything is right, I should be able to switch between about any run that weekend and come up with very similar predictions, minus the difference in the 60 foot. So when I'm right and crew chief is right, I should be able to pull up a run from yesterday morning, hit predict, and it gives me a number that I agree with, and it's going to be very accurate. But I should still be able to go with the night before, and it comes up with about the same answer, minus the difference in what I think the 60 foot's going to be. I usually, when I'm right, when crew chief is doing well, and I'm doing well staging the car, I know the prediction is plus or minus 3 to 4 thousandths of what the car actually runs. And so when I'm going down there, the most I'll ever hold is like 5 or 8 thousandths. Because if I can't drive with these guys on the top end that hold 500s, I just can't do it. But I can let go of the button on time, and I can put the car on the number and let the chips fall where they are. I also know, those of you that are still with me, that when I hot lap the car, I know the performance is going to improve on my car. It does. So I have to take into account that in the car. The run that's on the screen right now is a hot lapped run where I was on the brakes. The car really took off, but my 60 foot picked up 4 thou, and then that's 8 thou on my car in eighth mile. So that's as far as I'm going to miss it, is whatever the 60 foot's going to. Usually, unless I'm hot lapping. Hopefully that answers your question. Yes, I know. All right. So if there's any other questions, I will I'll let it go here. But I appreciate everybody coming to our webinar. Thanks very much for being Crew Chief customers, and I will have this available for you later on. Thanks again for showing up, though. I hope you all learned something. I'll end with it.